world of deceit, telling the truth is a revolutionary act. It's the David Knight Show.
As the clock strikes 13, it's Tuesday, the 23rd of June, year of our Lord 2026. Well, we're going to take a look at the cults that are competing to control America. And we're going to begin with one of the longest and strongest cults in America, the CIA. There's an interesting book that has been just resurfaced by Plumlee. I'm sure you remember that name. But all the things that we see, all these major conspiracies and crimes that were done in the latter part of the 20th century, early 21st century, he was right at the epicenter of that. He's now in his late 80s, and he's naming names and drawing the lines for everybody. We're going to begin with that. We're also going to take a look at the data centers. Folks, we have to focus on what these things really are, and not just about the practical issues, the practical problems with them. Those things they can assuage us with, they can push those aside. We have to focus on what the goal of these things are. And that is to control and to enslave us. That is the real issue. And Matt Trojala did a whale of a sermon, and we're going to talk about what he had to say about that and place you some excerpts for that as well. Well, let's begin with Plumlee and his book. It's called Deep Cover, Shallow Graves. Good start for that. And so he talks about his many decades of working in and around the CIA. He thought he was going to get killed because of what he knew. And of course, they did have him arrested under false pretenses. And the guy that they put in his cell was put there to kill him. And the guy took a liking to him and spared his life. Now, I don't know why they didn't come after him later on, but he got involved with him yet again. He has so many stories to tell at the epicenter of not just the JFK assassination, but the Iran-Contra stuff, the drug smuggling by the CIA, on and on. And of course, when we look at how our government has been transformed since the assassination of JFK, it wasn't just one president. It was a coup. And what we have had is a government of the CIA, by the CIA, for the CIA ever since that. Every president that has come along since JFK has got big ties to the CIA. And so Plumlee's memoir, as this is a free thought project, review of his book, it's pretty thorough. And even, actually, the original article comes from Covert Action Magazine. And they even have footnotes on their article, quoting where you can find what they had to say in terms of where it is in his book. And of course, what he has done has been documented quite a bit. He's testified before many of these committees, commissions that are investigating these issues. And yet somehow there's always somebody that's running the committee or the commission that spikes what he had to say, that hides it, that covers it up, doesn't even quote it in their commission. Were they talking about the Warren Commission, or were they talking about John Kerry's investigations? John Kerry, another guy with connections to the CIA, who was permitted to run for president. So his memoir shows the CIA often worked hand in glove with organized crime and was the one at times smuggling drugs into the U.S. Wait a minute. At times smuggling drugs? Continuously. They have been doing this continuously. They didn't even mention in here, because he wasn't involved in it, what the CIA was doing in Afghanistan. You know, they had their cocaine route, their crack cocaine stuff out of Central America, but they're also involved in the opium trade. And they were, after we took over Afghanistan, then Afghanistan became the number one place for opioids. It had gone from a small contributor. Actually, it wasn't small. It's like something like 10%, but it went to over 90%, record amounts every year while we were there. That was the CIA's doing. As a matter of fact, all this stuff, the entire Afghanistan war was as well. He claims that on the morning that JFK was killed, that he was flying a group of people, and he names the names, members of an assassination team into Dallas. He starts the story by noting that he was paid as a CIA pilot for years through cutout companies like Riddle and Dodge and Atlantic Richfield. Again, Atlantic Richfield. At one time, it's now been swallowed up by other companies. Now Marathon, and before that it was swallowed up by BP. But at the time this was happening, it was one of the largest of the oil companies at that point in time. And of course, we've seen the case of many of these people after they get out of the CIA, whether you're talking about George H.W. Bush, or whether you're talking about the lieutenant governor of Texas at one point in time, Dewhurst. These guys, after they got out of the CIA, became billionaires in the oil business, set them up. Dewhurst spent more money to get elected to the lieutenant governorship in Texas than anybody ever spent to get a state elected office at that point in time. And he was the one, as lieutenant governor, as leader of the Senate, who stopped the pushback against the TSA and the body scanners and the pat-downs and all the rest of the stuff. He was the one who organized and got that shut down. That's the kind of people that they put in, the CIA does. Plumlee and his colleagues did not know the overall mission by design since, as he pointed out, it was deeply compartmentalized. There was no discernible structure. The hallmarks were illusion, deception, and sleight of hand, according to him. But again, folks, the CIA is the cancer that metastasized and killed the American government. This American government has no relationship whatsoever to its original design. It has repudiated the Constitution and all of the principles and the letter of the law. And the CIA has been at the epicenter of this. It's not just about JFK. And when you look at their deep involvement with the drug war, you begin to realize just what they're trying to do. The drug war is more than just a way for them to get power, more than just a way for them to fund their secret wars like Iran-Contra. It is a blueprint for subverting the rule of law. That's why I've always opposed it. I've always been accused by people who didn't know me when I push back against the drug war. Oh, you libertarians, you just want to be able to use drugs freely and all the rest of the stuff. It's like, not me. Libertarians would kind of embrace that and make fun of it. It's like, should heroin be sold out of vending machines? I'm asked. Well, I say, only if they're privately owned. That is not my position at all. But I don't want to see prohibition. It always fails. And it is, the CIA used it to corrupt, and they used it to destroy the rule of law. Plumlee claims that his group was modeled after the World War II demolition unit called the Filthy 13, which was the inspiration for the movie The Dirty Dozen, if you remember that. It's kind of a hodgepodge of outcasts trained to infiltrate behind enemy lines. Plumlee says that at age 19 in 1957, he was recruited to fly to central Cuba for the purpose of supplying ammunition and weapons to Fidel Castro's rebels. Yeah, oh, well, we supported Fidel Castro. Well, guess what? We supported CIA, let's say the CIA government supported Fidel Castro. At the same time, they were also selling weapons to Batista government. Where have we seen that before? We've seen this constantly. We've seen this throughout the Middle East wars, where the U.S. government is supplying weapons to ISIS, Al-Qaeda, all the rest of these. At the same time, they say that they're fighting them, and they're supplying weapons to the people that ISIS and Al-Qaeda are fighting. They fund both sides of this. What they want is war and chaos constantly. And so they fund both sides. This is not hedging their bets. This is creating a war, creating chaos. Plumlee came to recognize that some of the CIA operatives working with Castro, like William Morgan, were there to spy on Castro. And Morgan was arrested for counter-revolutionary crimes and shot by a firing squad in March of 1961 with the Castros in attendance. And so as they point out, people who have investigated the CIA for a long time say, well, you look at his narratives and they hold up in terms of what he was recorded by the FBI in terms of when they're investigating the JFK assassination. The things that he was saying to the FBI at that point in time were later proven, but they never made it into the Warren Commission report. In 1958, he says he was sent to Nag's Head School of Illusionary Warfare Training. Been to Nag's Head. I didn't know they had that there. There he met a young Lee Harvey Oswald. The two were together. They were put through a series of tests. They were trained in intelligence techniques and in black ops. When he asked one of the instructors if he and his colleagues were being trained as intelligence agents, the instructor responded, "You're not intelligent enough to be agents, or you wouldn't be in this unit. You're nothing but cannon fodder." And of course, Lee Harvey Oswald said, "I'm just a patsy." Right? In 1961, after the Cuban Revolution was won by Castro, he says he started flying guns and ammunition to the anti-Castro rebels in the Florida Keys, Nicaragua, and in Cuba as part of the CIA effort known as the Cuban Project. He says that he worked under the operational name of William Buck Pearson with legendary CIA operatives such as William K. Harvey, David Atlee Phillips, Tracy Barnes, and E. Howard Hunt. Plumlee could not tell his wife Joan that he was working in intelligence for the U.S. government. He told her he was a cargo pilot for Riddle Airlines, and that was technically true because they were the ones who were paying his salaries, but their marriage broke up because he was gone for so long. One of Plumlee's frequent passengers was Colonel Ralston, whom he knew to be Johnny Roselli, whose mob ties went back to the late 1920s when he was recruited into the Al Capone organization at the 1927 Jack Dempsey-Gene Turney fight. Plumlee said that he would fly Roselli from his home in Tampa to L.A., where he would work in a shop with a fellow CIA operative, Chauncey Holt. They had a shop where they would create fake IDs, forged documents, and badges. He said some of the other names that he dropped: Charles Nicoletti, Detroit mob boss Peter Licavoli, Sam Giancana. These are figures that all were part of the JFK assassination. In November 21st, 2 days before, I think it was it the 23rd, I think, November 23rd? Anyway, in 1963, he was instructed to pick up Roselli in Tampa and escort him to Dallas, where President Kennedy was visiting. Plumlee also picked up E. Howard Hunt and a Cuban exile named Sergio Apabicia in West Palm Beach, Gerard Droller, also known as Frank Bender, and Frank Sturgis, another CIA operative. They were all part of what Plumlee calls an abort or an assassination decoy team. Plumlee says that he and his group landed at Hobby Airport in Houston. Then after a night in the Shamrock Hilton, they set off in the morning to Garland Airport in northeast Dallas. So they drove off in a car that was waiting for them. Plumlee went to a CIA safe house, then with Sergio, to see Kennedy's motorcade. At one point, Sergio whispered to him that someone was supposed to hit the president that day. When they reached Dealey Plaza, Sergio took out a radio and he started communicating with the other operatives in the plaza. Plumlee said he recognized Rip Robertson and saw E. Howard Hunt crossing the street in the plaza. Several men who looked like railroad workers were at the grassy knoll. He says that as the presidential motorcade passed by, he heard a loud pop that sounded like a firecracker. Two of the shots emanated from the trees behind him in the grassy knoll, and one flew right over his head. Plumlee claims that he saw JFK die, and that the story that Lee Harvey Oswald was a lone wolf assassination is total BS. The U.S. on November 22, 1963, experienced a coup d'etat similar to those that the CIA had engineered in countries like Iran and Guatemala 3 weeks earlier in South Vietnam. And of course, that's what they overthrow governments. Look at Iran, 1953. Constantly war, chaos, coups, assassinations. That is the legacy of the continuing legacy of the CIA. And we have not recovered from our coup. After the Kennedy assassination, Plumlee feared he would be targeted in a mop-up operation, which cutouts who knew too much, like himself, Sergio, Chauncey Holt, and others, would be silenced or eliminated. He felt especially vulnerable because of his knowledge that Lee Harvey Oswald was an intelligence operative, that they had trained together for that. Soon after the assassination, he was charged with writing bad checks, and he was locked up in the Denver County Jail. The charge was fictitious. No checks with his signature were ever produced. His cellmate, Jerry Dealey, was convicted of killing a Denver police detective. He later admitted to Plumlee that he had been instructed to kill him in exchange for being given a new trial and released on parole. But after hearing stories of his exploits flying for the CIA, he told Plumlee that he grew to like him, and he decided to spare his life. In 1975, Plumlee was interviewed by investigators working for the Church Committee, which investigated the CIA crimes during the Cold War. This is where they hold up the famous heart attack gun and all the rest of the stuff. But again, what came out of that was FISA. That was supposed to stop the CIA and the NSA from spying on Americans without a search warrant. Instead, what they did was they used it as legal cover to get a search warrant for Mr. and Mrs. Verizon, as Rand Paul has correctly summarized what the role of the FISA court is. And so he said he answered questions with them about the CIA's heart attack gun and his gun-running operations to Castro, his activities aiding anti-Castro rebels during the Bay of Pigs. He says that his testimony was classified top secret and has never been released. So all these people, they keep bringing him in for these commissions, keep asking him these questions, and he tells them, and they classify it, won't release it. They all know. They all know. And they're all afraid of the CIA because it is the one that rules them all. So again, the key crime of all this was spying on Americans without a warrant. FISA was supposed to be the solution. It became a legal cover for them. But the bottom line is that the sensational details about coup attempts and not coup attempts, but coups and assassination attempts, the heart attack gun, all the rest of the stuff, was used to distract the American public from the fact that they were being spied on. And so in 1970s, Plumlee said he started a plumbing business. Of course he would. Plumlee's Plumbing, I guess. He did it in Tucson, Arizona. But he was shut down by the IRS, and he faced physical intimidation and death threats. One night, he went to a casino. In July of 1980, a car pulled up next to him, fired shots into his window. Another time, he was beaten up badly in a bar by a stranger, and his house was burned down. An opportunity for him arose with a dramatic uptick in cocaine that was arriving from Colombia. It prompted the need for pilots who could infiltrate the Medellin and Cali drug cartels, supposedly. But then he realized that it was actually our government that was doing this. What do you think is really happening now with Trump and with Hegseth? Do you think that they're really at war with the drug cartels? We are the drug cartels, folks. You need to wake up about all of this stuff. And as a matter of fact, when you look at what is happening right now, it's straight out of the novel by Tom Clancy, Clear and Present Danger. Tom Clancy, who worked with Steve Pachinik on these different plots, and it's exactly what they were dreaming of for the longest period of time. And of course, the CIA is not monolithic. It's got left-wing people with a different agenda, but the right-wing people are now in charge now that Trump has gotten in. And of course, they did a great deal to get Trump in. Soon after he began flying,
the left-wing agenda is pretty much the same. It's just left-wing people in charge.
That's right. That's right.
They both want authoritarianism.
That's right. And it's this internecine warfare that's going on. They want to be the ones in charge. That's really the bottom line behind all of it. It isn't that, they have some high ideal or anything. It's just like Jonathan Pollard, right? It wasn't that he was a hardcore lover of Israel. He was just a traitor. He was selling secrets to anybody. Anyway, soon after he began flying, Plumlee found the whole system was corrupt. Bruce Babbitt, the governor of Arizona, who ran as a candidate for president in the 1988 Democrat Party primary and served as Secretary of the Interior under Bill Clinton, was among the government officials making money from the drug flights, which found their way into his and into other politicians' campaign coffers. When Don Bowles, a journalist with the Arizona Republic, began looking into the corruption related to Arizona's efforts to combat drug trafficking, and tips that people close to Senator Barry Goldwater were receiving money from drug trafficking from Colombia, Don Bolus, the journalist, was assassinated. And you see, and then Babbitt helped to put together a plea deal for Bowles' assassin, John Harvey Adamson, and got him released from prison. It just keeps going around. And so they create the threat. You talk about false flags. The war on drugs is the ultimate false flag. Yes, 9/11, they started to refine it at that point in time. But when you go back to the war on drugs, this began as a UN agenda. The UN created the schedule for the 4 different drugs and put the 4 different drugs in, putting marijuana in as the number 1 highest tier, saying that it had no medical uses. And yet Richard Nixon called it the war on drugs, and he puts this in. And so what they do, they create a problem. They run the drugs, and they'd been doing this before that. I mean, they were the ones, it was the CIA that was working on LSD and a lot of these other things. So they create the drug culture. They run the drugs. They create crack cocaine. They use it to fund their secret wars, and they use it to create a secret war against the American people, against our Constitution, and against any judges or politicians that aren't corrupted by them. Plumlee was caught up in the Iran-Contra scandal. He was instructed to fly to an 8,000-acre ranch in Costa Rica-Nicaragua border that was owned by an Indiana man named John Hull, who worked with Oliver North to transport weapons to Nicaraguan counter-revolutionaries the CIA was supporting in an attempt to unseat the left-wing Sandinistas. You know what's been interesting? I've not heard a single person reference Iran-Contra. Throughout all this Trump-Iran war, have you heard anybody talk about that? I've talked about it. I've not heard a single person talk about that history. The fact that we had Bill Colby, one of the founders of the OSS, which was during World War II, which was the predecessor of the CIA. And he became campaign manager for Ronald Reagan. He went to Iran. This was after they had thrown out the Shah that we put in with the CIA. And he said, keep those hostages. Don't release them. Even after their election, don't release them. Keep them until Reagan is inaugurated. They did exactly what he said. And in exchange, they sold them parts for the jet planes that had been sold to the Shah. And then they took that money and they started a secret war in Central America. They needed more money, so they created the crack cocaine epidemic. Why doesn't anybody talk about that? Oh, the boogie guy is the Iranians, right? Let me tell you something. The CIA is a bunch of terrorists that are far worse than anything that Iran could create, or Hezbollah. Far worse. Far more of a threat to us than anything out of Iran or Hezbollah or Hamas or any of them. Of course, we fund these organizations, just like Al-Qaeda and ISIS and ISIL and all of them. And everywhere our little pals go, you can have these Muslim countries where Christians have been allowed to exist for centuries. After we go in there with our occupation and our terrorist buddies, they're all put to the sword and the churches are torn down. Isn't that interesting? Plumlee was left to wonder whether President Reagan or Vice President George H.W. Bush had sanctioned the entire arms and drug smuggling operations that made a mockery of the so-called war on drugs. Well, let me solve the question for you, Plumlee. The answer is a resounding yes. They were both involved. Reagan, Bush, both Bushes were involved with the CIA. Of course, George H.W. Bush, supposedly somebody who had no experience with the CIA. They put him in charge to rebuild it after the church committee hearings. Of course, if you go back and you look at the ships that were used as part of the Bay of Pigs, it indicates that George H.W. Bush had something to do with it. I mean, one of the ships was named Zapata at the time that he had a company called Zapata Oil. Another one was named Barbara. So Plumlee's most famous contemporary was Barry Seal, the object of the 2017 movie American Made, starring Tom Cruise. In 1982, Seal established his base in Mina, Arkansas, where he flew guns to the Contras, then brought back drugs under the protection of Arkansas Governor Bill Clinton, whose ties to the CIA went back to the late 1960s. And again, folks, I would say that since JFK, we haven't had a president without deep ties to the CIA. Obama's mother's, his grandparents that we know about, the white grandparents, were some of the founding members of the CIA. But I would say that also includes Trump. When I was at InfoWars, I would see this constant rat line of right-wing CIA military intelligence people who were all pushing Donald Trump. They were creating this mythology of Trump, all the 4D chess stuff, the Sting, and of course the Q stuff. All of this mythology around Trump, folks, that was the CIA. It was filtered through another person who has long-time CIA ties in his family, Alex Jones. That's the way this stuff works. In the spring of 1983, Plumlee said that he reached out to Senator Gary Hart, who had served on the church committee. He had information about government involvement in drug running in Central America. He's trying to blow the whistle on this stuff. He presented to Hart and his staffer, Bill Holden, a detailed file replete with copies of a map of Central America that he had marked with notes, aircraft IDs, staging areas, weapon drops, and Contra crossover points from Honduras into Nicaragua. And so he gives all that stuff to Gary Hart. He said he also revealed people like Felix Rodriguez. Felix Rodriguez was very heavily involved in all of the Cuban stuff before that. John Poindexter, many that were later revealed to be principal players in the Iran-Contra scandal. He said that Hart and Holden told him the information he provided would be investigated by the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, except the person in charge of that was Senator John Kerry, and it went no further. Years later, the FBI reported that Senator Hart admitted to the FBI and the Department of Justice that the information Plumlee provided was forwarded to the Senate Armed Services and Senate Intelligence Committees. And he said from there, it went nowhere. Kerry spiked it. Now, I think that's one of the reasons why he was allowed to run for president against Bush. You know, you have to, when you look at this, they make sure they vet the candidates. They make sure that, you know, the two candidates that you get to choose from are both their people. We saw the same thing happen with the creation of the internet. You know, the internet goes back to DARPA and to a psychologist, J.C.R. Licklider, in the early 1960s. He called it the Intergalactic Computer Network, and they shortened it up to Internet. And of course, the very beginning of the Internet was DARPANet and some other things like that. But they really got into it in a big way in the late 1990s. They had to wait 30, 40 years before the technology caught up with the idea. But from the very beginning, it was really all about surveilling us, propagandizing us. And the people that they picked, that they gave the money to, if you look at the venture capital firms, it wasn't just In-Q-Tel, which was created openly by the CIA as a venture capital firm. But you look at most of these venture capital firms, they had people sitting on their board of directors who were current or former CIA, NSA, you name it, right? And so they're picking the people who are going to compete, whether you're talking about the CEOs of Google or whether you're talking about Zuckerberg or all the rest of these people. They know that these people, they're going to let them compete and let the strongest ones win. But they know that whoever they pick, just like you've got Kerry running against George W. Bush, they know that whoever they pick is going to do what they say. And if you look at Trump, the connections to Trump have not been drawn by anybody, but if you look at what he has done, it's pretty clear. If you look at the people who promoted him, the people who created this mythology around him, and then he gets in and he tells everybody, you know, this, I would never have done the Iraq war. It was all based on lies about weapons of mass destruction. And then he takes the woman who produced the lies using torture and then covered up the torture, Gina Haspel. He makes her the head of his CIA. And then under him, yes, William Barr was a part of it, but it was under Trump that they go after Julian Assange and have a plot to kill him. And they went after, got him arrested, and got him in jail. So the truth hasn't come out yet about Trump's CIA ties. Just give it time. His fingerprints and are all over this stuff. So the Kerry subcommittee did not find that the Contra and the U.S. government leaders were personally involved in drug trafficking. How about that? Just imagine that. Well, of course, Gary Webb exposed all this stuff as well. His book, Dark Alliance, or his series of reports for Mercury Press, I think it was. And he won awards for that. And then the government went to LA Times and some other mainstream media and said, we want you to destroy this guy's reputation. And they did. They put a whole team of investigators from the LA Times on Gary Webb. And he started to come back, and he, after a period of time where he was persona non grata, some of the stuff started to surface and people could see that it was true. He started making a comeback, and he was killed shortly after that. I believe he was assassinated. There was a movie that was done about it, Shoot the Messenger. But
Kill the Messenger.
Kill the Messenger, yeah. Kill the Messenger. But his family doesn't want to pursue it. They want to say that they'd rather say he committed suicide rather than pursue it and risk that they might get suicided. I understand. Well, an Army colonel named James Sabo tried to bring to public light the illegal transport of drugs in the U.S. from Central America. He was found dead. Official investigation said that Sabo had shot himself. However, an investigation published in the Journal of Forensic Research concluded that he had been murdered. Journalist Gary Webb was also murdered for breaking the story of the CIA Contra drug smuggling network. Tosh Plumlee said he was one of Webb's key insider sources, providing him with information about what he knew about the drug flights, the routes, the drop-off points, and clearances. At the end of the memoir, Plumlee emphasizes the horrendous betrayal that he felt, realizing that elements of the U.S. government murdered a popular president, sold the American people a cover-up story, and then later flew drugs in the U.S. without concern for the people who would be harmed and murdered, whistleblowers who tried to expose what they were doing. That's only the tip of the iceberg. When you look at the massive subversion of our country, culturally, everything the CIA has been involved in, and they have been the ones who have mapped out so many of these aspects, the drug war, the change in terms of the nihilism involved in art and architecture. It has been very deep, this pattern of subversion. It is very satanic.
And it really started with the CIA before it became the territory of BlackRock and Disney and,
Yes.
Larry Fink funding it and Disney pushing it and purchasing, existing IPs to transform them into these abominations.
That's right. And they had already started this long before they assassinated Kennedy, of course. That wasn't the beginning of the CIA's stuff. That was the point at which they took charge. They had been doing this kind of stuff, pushing drugs and other things like that well before that, coming up with subversive patterns. And look, folks, we're going to talk about artificial intelligence today. Understand that is a huge part of this. That and the internet and what DARPA is doing. Many of the events he described in his book are already known. The level of detail he provides, however, and the knowledge that he displays of historical events is impressive. CIA expert Dick Russell said he's convinced that Plumlee's saga is real. Verification having surfaced over the years with various federal investigative bodies. As I said before, his specific claims about the abort Operation Dallas were recorded under oath by the FBI on April of 1964. But the Warren Commission was finishing up its probe. They never referred to any of his documents, and they never called him as a witness. They kept that all secret. Russell says that Plumlee's narrative was formally documented again a decade later during the Senate Intelligence Committee's investigation into illegal CIA domestic activities. He's also testified multiple times under oath before congressional committees. These people, here's the bottom line, folks. Why does the FBI, why does the House, why does the Senate, why do these people keep calling him into these commissions to testify? Because they know that he knows. They know that he's a part of this. And then when he tells them, they cover it up. They're complicit in all of this. They know about all of this stuff as well. So he talked before various congressional committees, including the House Select Committee on Assassinations in the late 1970s, and the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, 1990 to 1991. The testimony, much of it originally classified as top secret, reveals not only Plumlee's proximity to the CIA's JM Wave station in Miami in the early 1960s, but his involvement in clandestine aviation activities during the 1980s so-called drug war. Yeah, that's where we are, folks. We need to understand how we got to the point where we are. And we need to understand, this is why I've talked about in the past, the CIA's deep involvement in the occult. And they were deeply involved in this. It is a satanic organization in every aspect of this. Why would anybody think that Jeffrey Epstein would not be intelligence? When you see something like that, when you see the rape, perhaps the murder of children, and you have these people that are being blackmailed, this is standard operating procedure for the Mossad, for the CIA, for Russian intelligence, and they're all dealing in the occult as well at the same time. Those are the people that rule the world. Remember, Satan said to Jesus, he said, "See all these kingdoms, they're mine to give to whoever I please." Well, guess who he gave them to? The CIA. And then we have Alan Greenspan, another figure from history, died yesterday at the age of 100. He steered U.S. monetary policy during his 5 terms as chairman of the Federal Reserve under 4 different presidents. And so he was there for 20 years. And longest serving Federal Reserve chair. He was also faulted for decisions that critics say created the conditions for the global financial crisis of 2007 and 8, advocating for deregulation of the financial sector. And what they mean by that, when we talk about the things that happened under Bill Clinton, which is what happened when he was chair of the Federal Reserve, the fact that Clinton started approving interstate mergers of banks, the Bank of America in California, Nations Bank in North Carolina, that set off a wave of competitive mergers that resulted in a half dozen too-big-to-fail banks. At the same time, the deregulation included getting rid of Glass-Steagall. Now, as a libertarian, I'm not a big fan of regulation by the government. But in this particular case, there was a purpose to Glass-Steagall. You see, when we had the Great Depression, you had people were speculating very heavily on margin. And so they said, well, we want to make sure the banks don't fail. So we're going to have FDIC, the Federal Depository Insurance Corporation. But because we're going to give them insurance, we're going to restrict, as a part of that deal, we're going to restrict the risky things that they were doing, the speculation that they were doing. So we're not going to allow the banks to get involved in investment things like that. And so they waived that. And then they not only waived it, but they let them speculate in derivatives. And all of this was happening under Greenspan. And we go back to the movie, The Big Short, the story, the book that was behind that. You had several people who were blowing the whistle on this. Nobody in Washington wanted to do anything. Alan Greenspan didn't want to do anything. They just let this thing run its course, and we know what happened with that. He studied economics at New York University, earning a bachelor's degree in 1948, a master's in 50. Then he started work on a doctorate at Columbia University under economist Arthur Burns, who would become later one of the chairmen of the Federal Reserve. In the early 1950s, he became an associate of Ayn Rand, who wrote Atlas Shrugged and many other novels. And he was very much a part of this inner circle, what I would call a cult. It's interesting that Ayn Rand, who was the ultimate individualist in terms of the philosophy of objectivism and what she was putting in her novels, they called themselves the collective. Something of a contradiction, I think. Objectivism was something that I didn't come across until I was inside the Libertarian Party. And there were a lot of people in there that were atheists, and that was their religion, their philosophy, objectivism. A equals A is how she would summarize that. I thought, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. You talk about shallow philosophy. I thought it was very broad and very, very shallow. And I was never impressed with it. And I saw that, in my opinion, it was not a sufficient basis for organizing a society. Christianity had been the basis of the founders' organization of society. Whatever you think about the founders, and of course about their personal beliefs, they could have been Freemasons, they could have been backslidden Christians or whatever. The issue is that the society was Christian. And you see, folks, that is really what is wrong with America today. American society is not Christian. That's why we have these fools and criminals who are running this country, because the country itself is reflective of that. In the early 1950s, he was part of our inner circle, very, very close friend, and it was something of a cult. I mean, people have talked about the cult of Ayn Rand. He said, Ayn Rand and I remained close until she died in 1982. I'm grateful for the influence she had on my life. I was intellectually limited until I met her. And he wrote that in his book, The Age of Turbulence, Adventures in a New World. A New World Order. Well, that was one of the things that some of the people I knew in the Libertarian Party kind of scratched their head and they go, now, how does Alan Greenspan, who's part of Ayn Rand and still her friend and everything, how does he square this, being chair of the Federal Reserve, the ultimate central planners? It is truly a contradiction, and I always thought about that. It's like, how do you justify being a part of the Federal Reserve? Ron Paul always opposed the Federal Reserve on principle. We should not have that kind of manipulation. And any true libertarian would oppose it on principle, I think. He achieved celebrity status when stocks soared to a record level under Bill Clinton. The writer Christopher Hitchens called him America's least likely celebrity. The Economist magazine dubbed him a rock star. His admirers called him the maestro of the economy. Ayn Rand, by the way, called him the Undertaker because he had this dour demeanor and he had a predilection for wearing dark clothes. So Greenspan served 5 consecutive 4-year terms, second longest tenure as Fed chair. In 2011, the Bipartisan Financial Crisis Inquiry Commission determined that the 2007-2008 crisis was triggered in part by the failure to discourage trade and securities backed by subprime mortgage loans amid an unsustainable housing boom, and his promotion of financial industry deregulation. Yeah, when you look at all that stuff, that has to be laid squarely at his feet. They pumped and then dumped the economy. All that stuff that was happening under Bill Clinton, that was all just fake sugar high. And that all came due. In a sense, it was the economy on crack cocaine. And I thought it was kind of funny. This book, little nuggets keep coming out from this book that's done by Maggie Halberman. And I think the other one, Jonathan Swain, I think was the one who did, Swan, I think did it. Anyway, this book that they're put together called The Regime, about Trump and the people in the Trump regime said, wait, they got a recording going on here? Basically endorsed it as about probably the best endorsement you could have. I'd be surprised, except they probably already printed this thing. They should have that as the subtitle. White House says, did they have a recording? Anyway, as part of that, Scott Bessent said that when Zelensky came to the White House, he said he was like Mr. Bean on crack cocaine. Well, I know where you can get the crack cocaine. You can get it from the CIA, right? And I had to look that up because I know Mr. Bean. I know what Mr. Bean acts like, and I thought that was pretty funny. That's a pretty good characterization of Zelensky. He does kind of have the bug eyes. But I had to look up what somebody on crack cocaine acts like. And it was a pretty apt description, frankly. And it was the reason he was in the White House was supposedly because of this deal that had been put together, financial deal by Scott Bessent. They're going to sign that deal, and then he was telling people, he said, I don't think that we can really trust Zelensky to behave himself. And of course, Mike Waltz said, can you at least wear a suit? Well, he didn't wear a suit. He didn't do any of that stuff. And instead, he kind of blew up with Trump, thinking that he wasn't getting all the money that he should get. And the other thing that Scott Bessent said about him, he said he's really kind of like Europe's special needs child. I guess he flew in on a short plane. But he blows up, and they kicked him out, and they didn't sign the agreement. The agreement was finally signed quite some time after that. We're going to take a little quick break here, as a matter of fact, and we haven't played this for a while. I'm trying to find the commercial. I don't even know where it is anymore.
It's in commercials.
Okay. Can you, if you know where that is, can you fire it for me?
In July of 1896, exactly 130 years ago, I warned this great nation of the government's plan to crucify mankind upon a cross of gold. Of course, that was before they started to bleed us dry with a death of 1,000 fiat paper cuts. But after you bought every single commemorative David Knight Show coin in gold color, the podcast's gold reserves are depleted. They issued 100 numbered gold-colored coins and declared the mint closed. The people cried out, "Free silver!" Well, the likes of J.P. Morgan can't stop this all-new commemorative coin. Now in silver color, while supplies last, this commemorative coin does not contain precious metal, but does keep the show on the air. Equal to the gold color, this limited run is numbered 1 to 100. Get yours today at thedavidknightshow.com. Hurry, because supplies are disappearing quicker than the purchasing power of the dollar.
Tell Alexa to add the APS radio skill and have access to the best channels anywhere. From country to blues, classic hits to news, APS Radio curates incredibly diverse playlists for you to enjoy. Get details at apsradio.com.
Hello, it's me, Volodymyr Zelensky. I'm so tired of wearing these same t-shirts everywhere for years. You'd think with all the billions I've skimmed off America, I could dress better. And I could, if only David Knight would send me one of his beautiful gray MacGuffin hoodies or a new black t-shirt with the MacGuffin logo in blue. But he told me to get lost. Maybe one of you American suckers can buy me some at thedavidknightshow.com. You should be able to buy me several hundred. Those amazing sand-colored microphone hoodies are so beautiful. I'd wear something other than green military cosplay to my various galas and social events. If you want to save on shipping, just put it in the next package of bombs and missiles coming from the USA.
Yes, and as Maggie Halberin and Jonathan Swan say in their new book, Scott Bessent was concerned about this. Of course, the deal involved rare earth minerals, and he'd been working on this, negotiating with Zelensky, and he knew the guy. And he said he was reportedly worried when he said, this guy's going to come to the White House for a signing. He said he was worried that the little effer would mess up the signing ceremony, which, of course, he did. And eventually, he didn't get any David Knight T-shirts, but he did eventually start to wear something that resembled a suit. It was a custom all-black military-style suit jacket, but not a MacGuffin T-shirt, because I won't sell them to him. But you can buy it at the David Knight Show, and you can also get, we played that by mistake, the ad for our new coin here. We have a silver version, as you heard, of the previous gold version. Of course, that's silver and gold colored. If you want the real stuff, you got to go to davidknight.gold. That'll take you to Tony Arterburn at Wise Wolf Gold. But we just had somebody who picked one up, and he had, from the original 100 gold-colored coins, he had a specific number, and he requested that number for the silver coin. So we can do that for you if you have something like that. You want to collect that. Or if you just missed your chance to get one when they were gold-colored, now you can get one just like it, except silver-colored. Well, there's been a controversial MIT study investigating what really is worse for the environment, they say. Gas or electric cars? And we've talked about this. There's been studies out there saying, well, by the time you look at all that has to happen in terms of the electric cars, they arrive with a much larger, quote-unquote, carbon footprint. So even though they supposedly use less carbon throughout their life, they arrive with more of it. And so there's been this debate back and forth. Folks, this is like trying to debate how many angels fit on the head of a pin. It's absolute nonsense. None of this matters. When you look at the massive data centers, surveillance centers is really what they are. When you look at these data surveillance centers that they're putting in, they don't care about energy used. Not at all. They don't care about it when they shoot up tens of thousands of satellites using SpaceX. They don't care about it. When they shoot off missiles that then blow up, what's the carbon footprint of the billions of dollars, $113 billion worth of munitions? It's like a giant fireworks display. They're saying they're going to have the biggest fireworks display of all this 4th of July in Washington to celebrate the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence. No, the biggest fireworks display of all was what happened with the Iran war. What was the carbon footprint of that? They don't care about any of this stuff. None of this stuff matters. And when you look at it, if you've got something that is not a clear solution, even by their own estimation, as to which one is worse by their imaginary standards, is gas or electric cars a bigger carbon footprint? Yeah, bend over, I'll give you a carbon footprint, all right? But when they have to debate this and they can't decide amongst themselves, why would they mandate it? Why would they mandate that one of them be banned and then the other one has to be rewarded? It's because they've got a different agenda, of course. And so the desire to have power over us with these data centers has outed their MacGuffin as being completely false. I don't know why people are even still talking about this. So we don't want their EVs. We don't want their wars. We don't want their data surveillance centers. I think in the future we're going to, kids will think that Washington, D.C., because they'll be dumbed down even more, will think Washington, D.C. refers to Washington Data Center, because that's what these centers really are about. They're really about a fascist partnership between government and corporations to create a totalitarian technocracy surveillance society. And so we don't want their EVs, their wars, their data centers, but they're going to do whatever they please. And Trump doesn't even try to hide it. I can do whatever I please. It doesn't matter. The law doesn't matter. Your rights don't matter. Your wishes don't matter. Overwhelmingly, a majority of Americans want an end to the Iran war. There was always a majority of people who didn't want it in the first place. And now they want it to end. Overall, 78% of respondents in the latest CBS YouGov survey said the U.S. should end the conflict now. How does Mark Levin still have a position on Fox News? Well, it isn't because he's got an audience that wants him there. It isn't because he's got an audience that agrees with him. It's because he's got the Israeli government that, just like the pharmaceutical companies, is going to pay Fox to keep him on. Most Americans believe the U.S. has not achieved its goals. What are those goals? Please tell us. We've had some goals that have emerged as a de facto, things that they talked about. Regime change. We got to stop the nuclear dust that's there. But then he comes back and he says, well, yeah, we killed all the good guys that we thought we'd put in their place. And he's got, because of his threats to end their civilization, Trump has the people of Iran coming out and using themselves as human shields to stop him destroying their infrastructure. And then when it comes to the nuclear stuff, he says, he admits, it's basically entombed in granite, he said, after the strikes in the summer of 2025. He said, we could go get it, but it'd basically just be a PR effect. So what are your goals there? You see, the goals are really about Israel's goals. And their goal in terms of Iran is to eradicate the civilization, which is what Trump said. He got a lot of pushback against that. A lot of people said you sound like a war criminal because he was quoting the Israelis, and the Israelis are war criminals. So RT says the U.S.-Iran talks are going to go nowhere. Neither side is budging on its demands. Israel remains a structural threat to any lasting peace. because they're going to keep coming after Lebanon. So again, we're back to Nacho. Not a chance that Hormuz opens. And you get a side of taco on that, where Trump is always changing. When we come back, we're going to talk about the how the means of defense abroad are becoming instruments of tyranny at home. And that is the autonomous killer weapons, but it's also the data centers themselves. We have to compete with the Chinese. In what way? How are we competing with Chinese? Is it we got to have faster autonomous weapons than they do? Or is it that we have to compete with the Chinese in order to have the same kind of tyrannical, permission-based society where everything is conducted by your ID that you have to give the government and get approval for everything? That's what GOP under Trump and Marsha Blackburn especially, that's what they want. They want a permission-based tyranny. And so we're going to talk when we come back about data centers. Yes, we need to fight them on the principle of liberty, not simply on the practical aspects of it. And I'm going to play for you when we come back. Matt Trujillo really nailed it. And as I was listening to Matt, I said, I really wasn't clear what I was talking about when I mentioned that. I've criticized, and again, I took some time to talk about it when I got a letter from a long-term listener and supporter who said, well, you're wrong. David, when he said, the Lord prepares my hands for warfare, my fingers for battle, he was talking about a literal battle. And it's like, yes, I understand that, but that is not where we live as Christians. As Christians, our battle is a spiritual battle. And so I had to clarify that. And in the same way, when I talk about the data centers, I said, don't get so caught up on the data centers. We should get caught up on the data centers. And it'd be a good thing if we could stop these horrendous things. They're horrible on a number of levels. But if we focus only on the aspects of power and pollution and expense of electrical costs and things like that, if we focus on that, we're going to lose. And that's what Matt Trujillo was talking about. He said we have to focus on it from the Christian principle. We have to pull it back and look at what the real purpose of this stuff is and oppose it on that basis. Because if we just oppose it on the nuisance factor, on the cost factor, we're going to lose big time. Before I take a break, I want to respond to some of the comments here. Brian and Deb McCartney, good to see you. Our son-in-law did his stint guarding the poppy fields. He finally realized that he wasn't there to fight the Taliban. Yeah, that's right. The Taliban did not like the poppy fields, and they would have destroyed them because they did destroy them when they were in charge. Yeah, it truly is amazing. And, Geraldo Rivera reported that and showed the people guarding the poppy fields.
And you can see the graphs of the amount of export that was coming from there. When we took over, it shot up, and then when we left, it went right back down. Yep.
That was something that Russia, Russia Today talked about quite a bit. They talked about how it was always record production. And they were talking about it while we were doing that for years. And I always said that was one of the reasons why they didn't plan on leaving. And we never did leave. We got thrown out. But it's not just the opium that was there. And of course, remember at the same time, surprise, surprise, we had the opioid epidemic here in the United States. You think that had something to do with it? A cheap supply of that stuff? Think about how dark and satanic the CIA is, that they would plan something like that. It's just amazing. And it might give you an insight into why the Sackler family that ran Purdue Pharmaceutical, why haven't they been punished? Is it because they were something of a front for the CIA? The CIA ran a war of drugs against us. It wasn't a war on drugs. It was a war of drugs waged against the American people, just like they did with Freeway Ricky Ross and the crack cocaine epidemic. That was a war of drugs against Americans. And this whole thing has been that from the get-go by the CIA. Dougalog says the interviews were released and are on YouTube. All the eyeball witnesses to JFK all heard the shots, all saw the smoke from the grassy knoll. That's right. Yeah, they know that they can lie to your face. Look at what Trump is doing, right? Even as He's talking about this pond and the vandals. You got some reporters asking him this. You got National Guard and you got local cops and park police and everything. They're all lined up around there, and yet you say that this thing is falling apart because of vandals?
Are the contractors who did the initial work for the reflecting pool, are they to blame for the current condition, or is it the vandals?
We had vandalism. No, vandals. You know, we have I think 290, 300 foot slit right through it, probably a box cutter or a knife of some kind. Or we
300
have
feet.
lifting up the basic, some of it, but it's not a lot of damage, but we'll probably have to let the water out and refix it. They went in there with a knife. I was just told by the people over at Parks, they have 5 people are arrested and 5 people are under investigation right now. And it's a sad thing. In addition to that, we put brand new, beautiful grass all around. They put these massive letters on the grass. You probably know about that, right? And they said 8647. They probably got that from the dirty cop, Comey. You know he's a dirty cop, don't you? Dirty cop. He's a crooked guy. They destroyed the grass. So that's a big thing. But we're going to get it back very soon.
National Guard and police have been all over the mall. How would these vandals have gotten so close to do something like that? Do you have any proof of this?
I mean, we didn't have a lot of them then. Who would think that somebody would go into a pool and take a knife and start cutting it?
But do you have proof of that?
Yeah, we
you
have
have
proof.
photos or videos?
Well, let's put it this way.
Got video?
When you have a 350, I think it's 350, not 250, a 350-foot slit
Keeps growing.
from one end to the other, you think that's proof? You think that's proof?
Reporters have been down there today looking for that slit that you mentioned, and
Well,
there's no evidence of
all
it.
you'd have to do is see the Parks Department. They'll show it to you. Or see the secretary. But I saw they cut it very violently. The same thing with the floor. They cut it, and then they lifted it. They pulled it, and that's what it is. And we've done over 50.
He's the perfect guy for them, isn't he? Just lie to your face. Just make this stuff up, just like you did about the killings in Minnesota by ICE. He and Kristi Noem just made up their own version of what happened, and he stuck to it. And he had New York Times reporters there. They were interviewing him, and they said, "Well, that's not what happened." He goes, "Get me the video of this." He'd never seen it before. When he saw the video and realized that it showed that he was lying, he just changed the topic, moved on. And of course, how is somebody with a knife going to cut 350 feet? Practically, okay? He had said, when he put this out, he said, it's so strong you can't cut it with a knife. But now he's saying that they've got a 350-foot cut. If that cut even exists, which is doubtful, it sounds more like a flaw in the manufacturing from this guy that had been convicted twice of bribing politicians and got a no-bid contract with Trump. I wonder how much this guy really made from Donald Trump. Yeah, it is crazy. NMAX, William Casey, CIA director, we'll know when our disinformation campaign is complete, when everything the American people believe is false. That's right. And he was the guy, Wild Bill Casey. He was the guy that manufactured the Iran-Contra affair. Yeah. Ronald Reagan, our greatest president, right? Maybe the CIA's greatest president, greatest deception. Everybody believed everything he had to say. He was a great actor. And of course, Trump is the actor that they need for today. NMAX, Trump is saying China has a wonderful system. It works really well, signaling to you that that is his plan for you and me. And of course, we've seen that before. We had George W. Bush say, I kind of envy the Chinese dictators. They can do whatever they want. And we heard basically the same thing from Justin Trudeau. They've all envied the power of these people. And that's why these data centers are so vital to them. It gives them the tool to have the kind of power that they've always lusted after. Birdhouse Blue says Trump signed the cryptography executive order and couldn't even pronounce the word correctly. I struggle with it as well, right? And asked, what is that? I don't know. During the group signing yesterday. Yeah, that's right. I guess that's why Marsha Blackburn called it the Genius Act. Oh, well, yeah, that's absolutely what I want, because I'm a stable genius. So I'll have stable coins. That'll be genius, won't it? Epstein Island. Oh, by the way, that reminds me. He said, we've arrested 5 people. Oh, there's a meme going around on social media. It shows a reflecting pond. It says 5 people arrested. It shows Jeffrey Epstein in the files. 0 people arrested. That is Trump's priorities there. Epstein Island says Trump is such a moron he can't even paint a pool, even at $14 million. Now he's killing the ducks. Yeah, they had a dead duck in the pool the other day. I guess they repeated the line from the Marx Brothers, buy a duck. Why a duck? Anyway, the Birdhouse Blues said the infamous culprit is a box cutter again. That's why, as he points out, that's why the TSA was looking for it. Now you're going to have people have to get shaken down by the TSA before they go into the park there. Make sure they don't have any box cutters.
Yeah, forget nukes. It's these box cutters are the most dangerous weapon in the world, according to the government, apparently.
That's right, yeah. Jerry Alatalo says, while VP J.D. Vance was in Switzerland trying to reach a peace deal with Iran, it seemed like Trump was trying his utmost to undermine the talks. That was my take on it. Absolutely. I said that yesterday. Sabotage it over the weekend. He threatens the people who are there. And they said, well, that's it. We're leaving, because it's not the first time they've been threatened with assassination. That's the way the Zionists operate. And make no mistake about it. Trump is a Zionist. No question. We're going to take a quick break, folks, and we'll come back and we're going to talk about these data centers and why and how we need to fight them. We'll be right back.
You're listening to The David Knight Show.
Hear news now at apsradionews.com or get the APS Radio app and never miss another story.
You know, let's talk about AI here. And we'll lead off with this story about John Lennox. He is a professor of math at Oxford, and he has been a Christian apologist as well. He's had a lot of very high-profile debates with high-profile atheists like Richard Dawkins, and of course, it's his calm and jovial manner, along with his clear logic, that has helped him to really cut through the nonsense from Richard Dawkins. By the way, it's kind of interesting because now he's talking about AI, and it was Richard Dawkins who just succumbed to AI psychosis, saying, I'm trying to convince myself that what I'm talking to here is not conscious, and I'm failing to convince myself. Well, John Lennox thinks that the devil could use AI to destroy the world in his mind, and says that AI could lead to totalitarianism. Well, that's its purpose, quite frankly. And so he's just written a book called God, AI, and the End of History. The failure of governments to regulate it adequately somehow managed to share his dystopian picture with a smile on his face and a gentle lilt of his native Irish accent. And again, when he's looking at this, he says all these people who are looking for safe spaces and not wanting to hear other things. He, in this interview that this person wrote about, there had just been a situation where a law professor had a lecture series on gender identity canceled because there are protests by pro-trans activists. He said, these people are looking for safe spaces and they don't want to hear anything else. It is a kind of totalitarianism of the mind. Let them go home to mummy if they can't handle it, he said. Universities, he said, are moving toward teaching people only what they want to hear, and that will be the end of universities. We need to get back to the classical notion of teaching people how to think rather than what to think. And that really is the essence of it. If you are going to be involved in homeschooling, that's the way you need to approach this. As a matter of fact, many people have written on this. Dorothy Sayers and others have talked about a classical education and the fact that the purpose of universities and what was originally called a liberal education, what that meant was not what we see as the checklist of ideological shibboleths that the left puts up there. That meant to liberate the mind, right? Liberal used to mean freedom. That's what we'll talk about. Instead of the word libertarian, many people prefer to use the word classical liberal. A liberal used to mean somebody who was focused on liberty. And so what they were trying to do with a liberal education was to liberate the mind and to give people tools so they could learn tools to think critically. So they could begin with grammar, and then they could move on to rhetoric and logic. And that is what he's talking about. He says totalitarianism is in the crosshairs when it comes to AI. And so he's very concerned that it runs the risk of falling into the hands of malign operators. Newsflash, he may be, and I think he is an excellent Christian apologist, but I think he's behind the curve when it comes to artificial intelligence. It's not that it may fall into the hands of malign operators. This whole thing was a malign operation to start with by government. It was a government operation that was malignant and belligerent. He said the number one bad actor in the world is the devil. So you could say that AI could be used by the devil, but it could also be used by God. He offers a glimmer of hope, he said. AI's replacement of human beings with a machine is not inevitable. It is not. And we need to remember that. But I wanted to play for you Matt Trujillo, who I have interviewed multiple times, and Matt always touches my heart when I hear him speak. And he had an excellent sermon that he gave to his church about AI and data centers. And he gets to the core of it. He's not an Oxford math professor, and he's not talking about the existence of God with top-notch atheist debaters, but he really understands this at its core. And so I wanted to play for you some excerpts that I put together from Matt, and I'll comment as we go along in the middle of some of these. Here's the beginning of his sermon.
I had heard bits and pieces about these data centers that are being built by massively wealthy men and corporations with the greased palm of government behind them, by the way. So I finally put some time into researching them more deeply. Why? Because we should be alarmed when something is being built that can store such huge amounts of information about every individual on the planet. That should concern you. And it shouldn't just draw you to your prophecy chart, which I'll get into later. When these types of things are being built, there is a potential for abuse. Whenever you see the businessmen and government men joining hands, working like beavers, you should be alarmed. Whenever you see the businessmen and government joining hands in this regard, there is the potential, really the likelihood for abuse and immorality and tyranny. So I thought I would find lots online about that, about the potential tyranny of these machines. You thought, wouldn't you just assume there'd be plenty about that? But no. Very little online. Like when I put in data centers are surveillance centers. When I put that in, because they are, and if you think otherwise, you're naive, the growth of the surveillance state on steroids is what we're talking about here. The growth of the surveillance state on steroids. All I could find was about all the surveillance that is going on to protect the data centers themselves. Nothing about the state using them for nefarious ends. And what did I find when it came to opposition to the data centers? Because I had heard so much about these data centers being opposed. I'd see little flickers of that in the news again and again for a few months. I learned there was opposition from the left to these data centers due to the potential harm to the environment. And I learned that there was opposition from the right regarding these data centers, regarding tax matters. And I also learned that everybody, left, right, or indifferent, are concerned about the cost of electricity. And yet nothing about opposition because of tyranny and the potential abuse of power. And I found that alarming. I searched in so many similar ways, yet nothing. Like, have such things been scrubbed from the internet? I was left thinking.
That's right. Is it about electrical power or is it about political power? You know, when I look at this and I look at Marsha Blackburn, likely to be the next governor of Tennessee, she is the Johnny Appleseed, sowing the seeds of technocratic dystopian surveillance state with the different bills that she's put together. And I thought, you know, what he had to say there was spot on. We need to understand that this is about tyranny. It's not about electric bills. Yes, it should be about electric bills, and that's important. But as he points out, if you complain about electric bills or you complain about the use of water, they can do something about that eventually. And they will still plot ahead with their surveillance state agenda. We have to get to the real issue. The reason that they're putting these things up is because of surveillance. These other things are just downstream effects that we're going to experience first. But it's going to be far worse to live under their political power than it is to have to pay for the additional electric bills that are there.
The biggest concern about the data centers is the control over our lives by government and corporations. These data centers will be used to power the digital money, including the social credit score for individuals. Understand the CBDC, central bank digital currency, is programmable. It is permission-based. The government can tell you how you spend your money. They can decide what you are allowed to eat or if you eat. I remember one week into COVID, I told my wife, I said, they could starve us all to death with their insanity. I was sitting there contemplating the morality of breaking into Piggly Wiggly in the middle of the night, leaving money on the cash register, and feeding my family. Fortunately, even though I was the only one ever in Piggly Wiggly without a mask, they never threw me out. The potential for abuse here is massive regarding these machines. The control, and that is the biggest concern, is totalitarian in the apex sense of the word. Data centers have the capacity to micromanage every person's life, every one. Understand these things are massive. A man I know who drives a dump truck over at the one being built in Port Washington, which the people didn't want, but the government officials went along with anyway, because like I said, you have the greased hands of government officials from the big corporations and the wealthy men. From the time he enters with his dump truck, goes in, dumps the rock, which takes about a minute, fill it up with dirt, which takes another minute, and drives all the way back out, it's 45 minutes. That's how massive the thing is. If you haven't gone over there just to see the diameter of the place, it's incredible. And we will be getting some video footage so you can see what's going on. And they're building these all across the country, all across the nation, hundreds and hundreds of them going up. And most often the people are ignored And the county officials just let it sail right through. The state officials let it sail right through. Why? Because government officials always get drunk when they see dollar signs. That's why. And they go along with anything. In Utah, Kevin Leary and other investors have bought 40,000 acres. And don't worry, the data center isn't going to be 40,000 acres. It's only going to be 10,000 of the 40,000 acres. 10,000 acres. Do you know how big 10,000 acres is? So, like, compare that to the largest manufacturing plant in the United States, which is the Boeing plant in Everett, Washington. That is the largest manufacturing plant in the nation. You know how many acres it has? 92. This data center has 10,000 acres, and it does nothing except gather information about you and run their one world hell, their totalitarian regime.
Isn't that amazing? That's an amazing statistic, and good for him for looking that up. The largest manufacturing facility we've got, actually making something we could use, planes, Boeing, is 92 acres. And yet the data center itself, not the surrounding area, but the actual data center itself, 10,000 acres. Think about that. 100 times bigger. It's just impossible to imagine the scope and the scale of this. And what is its product? Its product is far more important than a bomber. Its product is intelligence on you and I. You know, we talked about the Central Intelligence Agency and the fact that they've been spying on American people. That is the essence, the product of what these people really are about. And it's about control, as he pointed out. It's about ID. It's about the CBDC, or the, as I call it, the CCDC, the crony capitalist digital currency, the stable coin, right? CCDC comes after CBDC once people figure out what CBDC is about. Oh, we can fix that. We won't do it with a central bank. We'll do it with crony capitalist partners, right? That's why I say, if you don't understand the principle of this stuff, if you fight it on the fact, I don't want the central bank doing this kind of stuff. No, you have to focus on the fact that it's going to be monitoring and giving prior approval to every transaction, and that they can ban you from doing anything, from buying, selling, owning anything, by shutting that down. And unless you focus on that, you can easily be fooled by going from a central bank digital currency to a crony capitalist digital currency, stablecoin, that's going to enrich Trump and Lutnick and these other corrupt criminals in Washington. Let's go to the next section that he's got here.
If you've never read anything about technocracy, might be time to catch up. Do a little reading about what you're looking at, what you're facing. This one going up in Utah will use twice as much electricity just for itself, twice as much as is used in the whole state in a year. It's insane. These massive machines will know everything about you. They will know when you're going to break wind, even before you know you're going to break wind. Many bad men with their massive corporations are involved in making these data centers. Even Mr. ESG, Larry Fink from BlackRock, is involved. Why is he involved? Because they're concerned about surveillance of these data centers, keeping them from... He said, I don't want some $3,000 drone destroying this multi-million, billion-dollar facility. Well, why would they be concerned about that? Have you seen anyone blowing up electric fields around here? No. Maybe they know what these things are going to be used for, and that's why they're so concerned. And that's the only thing you can find on the internet when you talk about the surveillance state regarding these data centers, is about surveillance of the data centers, making sure no harm can come to them. Fink and Trump were at odds during the election. You may recall that. But now, due to data centers, they're buds. They will sell the acceptance of the surveillance state to Americans on the basis of safety and convenience. And of course, everything will be voluntary until it isn't voluntary. Listen to me now, and this is an important thing to live by. If you give up the principle, they can always convince you to accept the practical. If you want to argue and make your stand based on the environment or taxes or the cost of electricity, dumb, dumb, and dumb. Stand on the principle. These are unfettered machines run by wealthy men in government with nothing in law to restrict the activity there. Understand that. If you give up the principle, they can always convince you to accept the practical. They can rewrite the narrative. Kevin Leary did this 2 weeks ago. He knows it's a huge problem they've run into across the country because now they've seen where people's electrical costs have soared up. Oh, no electricity from the current form of things in Utah will be used for our $10,000. They will always correct their narrative to make you accepted of the practice. Always fight on the principle, alarm people regarding the potential of tyranny and abuse regarding these machines, bringing all this data into one location. Insane.
Yeah, it is all about centralization. And of course, Zbigniew Brzezinski talked about this. He said, you know, you're going to not break wind. It'll know if you're going to break wind before you break wind. Well, basically, Zbigniew Brzezinski said the same thing when he wrote his book in the early 1970s, 50 years ago. He said in his book, Between Two Ages, he said, the coming age, the technocratic age, we're going to know everything that you do before you do it. And we go back and we look at geospatial intelligence, fastest growing part of the intelligence agencies over the last couple of decades. Part of that was anticipatory intelligence. That was called AI. And of course, artificial intelligence is going to give them anticipatory intelligence as well. That's what this has all been designed for. And as Matt correctly points out, there's nothing in law, they say, to restrict them because they don't pay attention to the Constitution and Bill of Rights anymore, right? But it is actually the other way around. Trump and Marsha Blackburn, she is the one who is preparing the way for all this stuff. You can think of her as the John the Baptist of the Antichrist. That's what Marsha Blackburn is. You know, I had Monty Fritz, who's running against her here in Tennessee. I had him on to interview him. And he's just so nice. He won't criticize her. It's like, I'll do it for you. Let me tell everybody what she's really about. She's like the John the Baptist of the Antichrist. That's what Marsha Blackburn is. She's preparing the way for all of this stuff. She's preparing the way for this Antichrist king who call artificial intelligence, because this is a tool, a creation of the government for the government's purpose, to enslave us, to create a surveillance state. She's preparing the way by making sure there are no legal restrictions going to be allowed, even at the state level. You know, get that stuff out of the way. And she's doing it for the cryptocurrency. She's doing it for artificial intelligence, for all this stuff, because she understands that a universal ID, which Bill Gates was very keen to have, a universal ID as well as controlling the currency with a digital currency, as well as artificial intelligence, that is the unholy trinity that Marsha Blackburn is pushing on behalf of Trump. Well, let's continue with this.
The data centers are a tyrant's paradise. All the great tyrants and dictators of the past would have loved to have this technology available. We must bring Christian thought to bear upon this love affair with AI and data centers. And we must bring Christian thought to bear, not because it fits into our eschatological scheme, and that's how we apply it. By the way, many Christians will do nothing in opposition to data centers because of their faulty eschatological views. They are already neutralized. The number one reason you should oppose these unfettered data centers is because of the nature of man. Because of the nature of man. What is the nature of man? The world defines the nature of man as basically good. That most men are basically good, But Scripture defines the nature of man quite differently, namely that he's wicked and in need of a Savior, namely Jesus Christ. The idea that man is basically good is a poison you sell to young men who are still full of their own hubris and arrogance. But most men, by the time they're 40 years old, looking at the lives of men and looking at their own life, realize, no, the biblical view is true. Man is wicked. He's wicked, and he's in need of a Savior. The Scripture is abundantly clear from cover to cover on its testimony that man is wicked and in need of a Savior, every man. Turn with me to Romans chapter 3. I'm not going to go through 500 verses. I'm going to share with you a verse from the New Testament and a verse from the Old Testament and move forward in my sermon. But look at Romans chapter 3, verse 9. The Scripture reads, "What then? Are we better than they? Not at all, for we have previously charged both Jews and Greeks that they are all under sin. As it is written, there is none righteous. No, not one. There is none who understands. There is none who seeks after God. They have all turned aside. They have together become unprofitable. There is none who does good. No, not one. Their throat is an open tomb. With their tongues they have practiced deceit. The poison of asps is under their lips, whose mouth is full of cursing and bitterness. Their feet are swift to shed blood. Destruction and misery are in their ways. In the way of peace they have not known. There is no fear of God before their eyes." Man is wicked. The idea that man is basically good is a belief America's founders would have never embraced. In fact, it is precisely their belief that man is wicked and in need of a Savior, namely Jesus Christ, that they erected America as a true federalism. It was because of their view that it's biblical, that man is wicked and in need of a Savior, that they pillared America as a true federalism. What's a true federalism? A true federalism is a government polity within a nation in which all four of the great governments matter. Family government, church government, civil government, all meant to produce within the individual the fourth great government, self-government. All have their own role, functions, and limits. But we live in a statist hell. So the state has actually invaded the jurisdiction of self-government, has invaded the jurisdiction of family government, and the churchmen have been busy playing the whore and have ceded church government over to the state. So family government invaded, self-government invaded. It's an insanity. When it comes to a true federalism under civil government, it means that you have multiple levels of government and multiple branches at each level. And the reason you have that is because, again, man is wicked. You don't want power to reside in one man's hands. You want these subsidiary powers, so to speak, these lesser powers, like county government, local government, state government, in order to check wickedness from the federal government. Or to check, if you're in county government, wickedness from state government or federal government, on down the line. Our founders understood that power corrupts. How many men have you seen in your life that get a job at Kmart? I'm dating myself now. Young people are like, what's Kmart? It was like a forerunner to Walmart, okay? They get a job at Walmart as a security guard, and you would think they were hired as an FBI agent. And that's why you never give any person or persons or human institution unlimited, unchecked power. Because it results in abuse of power. And with these machines, you have massive potential of abuse of power. Most politicians in our day are clueless to the kind of thinking I just proffered to you. They think men are basically good.
Yeah, and that is not what the Christian society at the time our country was founded understood. And you hear the founders talk about that. Well, since men are not angels, we need to have government. But since that's going to be made up of men, what do we do? Well, the answer is Matt pointed out, it was to have a division of power. The more you consolidate, which is what the founders would talk about, we talk about centralization. They talked about consolidation. The more power is consolidated, the more evil it becomes, and the more predictably evil it becomes. And that's absolutely true. And of course, what Matt has written is the book, The Lesser Magistrate, which you can find at defytyrants.com. You should read that book. It is very, very short, and it is to the point, and it covers all the bases. He is a very succinct writer, and he gets it exactly right. You have to have different levels of power, because once you put all this power under one person, that's why we don't have the kind of power that Trump is usurping. Was never intended to be in the presidency, and it is absolutely against the Constitution. Well, let's continue on with this. I've got just a couple more clips I want to play for you, but I think he is spot on in his analysis of this. And we have to understand, I'll reiterate, we have to fight this on the principle of the abuse of power. We have to fight it on the understanding that this is going to be used to create a surveillance slave state. And we don't want that. This is not about electric power. This is about political power.
Government officials are in cahoots with it all, either because they are wicked themselves or because they love money and are bought off to secure their compliance. Most men are those men. This is why the prophets would address the magistrates in connection with the businessmen and the rich, because they acted hand in glove to impose the evil on the nation. They promote it, impose it, and or are in complicity with it. You know, I've spent a lot of time among the government officials over the last 10 years, and here's something I have learned. Economics drives politics. You go to the State House thinking it's about righteousness, justice, honesty, equity, and you get there and you realize it's about three things. Number one, money. Number two, money. And number three, money. And you realize it's a whorehouse. And most all of them will sell their souls, including those who name the name of Christ, sitting over at the whorehouse. It may not seem like a big revelation to you, what I just said. But when I had it, it was huge for me. I'm the kind of guy who never thinks much about money. I forgot to do the offering this morning. It's my one time in 3 months to do it. I'm the kind of guy who never thinks much about money, not driven by it, but I learned quickly once I engaged the government officials that most men are driven by money and wealth and ease. And it is prevalently seen in the State House. Economics drives politics, it drives civil government, it drives law, it drives public policy. At the federal level, almost every one of those magistrates are bought and paid for by wealthy men and corporations. That is why I look to the lesser magistrates to interpose against the evil, injustice, and immoralities spewing forth from that beast over by the Potomac. But what I've had to learn also is that those state magistrates are overwhelmingly worthless dogs themselves. I called COVID 9 days after Trump declared the national emergency. I preached my first sermon attacking and repudiating the narrative that they had painted. People wondered, and I had many people come to me over the next 2 years, after 6 months had gone by, and they started figuring it out. How did you figure that out so quickly? Number one, I hold to a biblical view of the nature of man. He's wicked. Number two, I'm a student on the history of the governments of men. They're wicked, overwhelming. And number three, I know too many government officials. That's how I was able to call it. I knew something wasn't right.
That's
I spent
right.
52 hours that week studying from virologists and others, men who had devoted their whole lives to these matters, debunking everything they were saying in their narrative before they were silenced by big tech. I took much grief from people for taking a stand. I I was spoken evil of, publicly disrespected repeatedly, removed from groups and group chats. Those are Christian ones. I say all that to say this to you now. I'm warning you here now about these data centers. And you must oppose them on principle. Because as I said earlier, they will always win the debate on the practical. They will always rewrite the narrative. Many people ran to vote for Trump. I tried to tell people we have to quit voting for the lesser of two evils. That must be part of our heartfelt repentance. We must fear God, not man. And if a man's willing to openly impugn God's law regarding the filth of homosex and the murder of the preborn, we should not vote for him. But Mr. Worldly Wise Man, the Christian talking heads and organizational heads, who rake in massive amounts of money and only a dope would send a check to them, convinced all the Christians to vote for the lesser of two evils, not realizing that in 30 years of voting for the lesser of two evils, the lesser evil has gotten more evil. Rather than what Worldly Wise Man told us, we would be able to incrementally turn it back. Doesn't work that way. I said part of our repentance as God's people is to quit voting for the lesser of two evils, that we must fear God and not man, and not vote for men who openly impugn the law of God. I reminded Christians that Trump gave us COVID last time. He still brags about the shot and the military action of warp speed. I said he gave us COVID last time. What will he give us this time? And here it is. Data centers. He's put it all on steroids. $500 billion Stargate project, working with nefarious men to get this all accomplished, not just here, but around the world.
He's absolutely right. And of course, that was the very first thing that Trump did. Very first thing he did was to continue on with his mRNA genetic code injections and to pair it with artificial intelligence. That was what Stargate was about. You know, as Matt said, he figured out COVID pretty early because he knows that the heart of man is desperately wicked. He knows the history of governments. And of course, if you know the history of our government, the history of our government is not about George Washington and the rest of it. That republic was long ago. We're on version 4 right now. And right now in version 4, our government is the CIA. And if you want to know the history of our government, the CIA, look at things like Dark Winter. And then you understand what they've been practicing to do to us for decades. And if you look at what DARPA was talking about in terms of the internet, you know that they were plotting to do this for decades before they had the practical tools to do it. Now they have the practical tools to do it. And as Matt was pointing out, it's money that controls them. They all prostitute themselves for money. Yes, the love of money is the root of all evil. And guess what? These people are conjuring money out of thin air. Fiat. What kind of power is that, right? We've had a virtual society for a long time with fiat money. The fact that they can just print dollars, and of course, that's what Alan Greenspan was doing at the Federal Reserve. They're just printing dollars and using that to overthrow the principle of federalism. That's what the 10th Amendment is about. They don't directly challenge the 10th Amendment. Instead, what they do is they bribe the officials with money that they just conjured out of thin air. Here's the final clip, and then we will move on.
It's these data centers. They are fraught with massive potential for abuse by governments, and abuse by the corporate overlords, bastions for potential tyranny. In my view, inevitable tyranny.
It was designed for that.
When we were given COVID, remember who we found out? Like how you couldn't know it, because when they presented warp speed, there were the military people. That was like a huge, what? And I spoke about that. And people in the military belittled me, disrespected me, and told me I'm a schmuck. I should keep my mouth shut. And then it all came out later. The military was all part of it. Was conducting it. Yeah, and you know who's involved in the biggest one being built in our nation over in Utah right now? The Military Development Department in Utah. The military. I think that should raise some concerns I mean, go search for people saying something. Hard to find many people. Hardly any at all. If you wait till they do exactly what he said, the usurped power has strengthened itself by exercise and entangled the question in precedents, you're done. We must bring Christian thought to this matter and to people regarding data centers. Understand, most Americans think man is basically good. They're operating from that premise. Most Christian people in America now believe man is basically good. You do realize we've reached the place, and I'm closing with this, we've reached the place with the internet where you do not know much of what is real or much of what is fake. And these things aren't even humming yet. Think what they're going to be capable of doing to create incredible fake reality, the ultimate narcissist paradise.
A fiat reality. To go with our fiat currency.
I am stunned how easily people already believe fake AI stuff generated. Actually believe it. We're just like, are you that dense? Do you ever look up anything that you share before you share it? Are you a dope? Should I menace you with other pejoratives? They use this stuff to paint false narratives. Imagine what these things will be able to produce once they're humming. And one final thought is, don't shop where they employ flock cameras.
Amen. Yeah. You know, when he's talking about the military, let's understand where this is really coming from. It's DARPA, okay, which is defense, but it is they're the ones who began the mRNA development. And of course, when you talk about the military personnel, they want to make sure that there's no personnel there that won't reflexively obey anything they say, including injecting themselves like they were lab rats. And so they drove out the people who had religious objections. They drove out the people who had constitutional objections. That was a big part of the military mandate that was there. But again, this is coming from DARPA. They've been at the center of all this stuff. It was DARPA that began the self-driving cars. It was DARPA that began the humanoid robot experiments. They funded these competitions. And they're the ones at the epicenter of all this stuff. Well, going back to the two basic takeaways, we need to understand that the heart of man is desperately wicked. That's why we don't trust government. And you also need to understand that the purpose of all this stuff is the government's purpose. They're the ones who are working hand in glove, as he points out, the greased palm of government. And of course, how they grease it? With fiat currency. It is the hand of government that is pushing all of this stuff. And it's because this is going to give them power that they could only dream of. I talked about yesterday how Trump was bragging about it to Maggie Halberman and Jonathan Swan in terms of the book that they just came out when they were interviewing him. He said, I'm one of the greatest leaders ever. There have been great leaders in the past, and think about who he thinks of and who he names as great leaders. Is it Washington? Is it Jefferson? Is it Madison? No. He names Attila the Hun, Genghis Khan, Stalin, Mao, Hitler, Napoleon. These people were people who were greedy for power, people who were aggressors, murderers, people who started wars for their power, people who ruthlessly persecuted Christians, Stalin and Mao, for example. And these are his heroes. These are the people that he compares himself to and thinks that he is greater than they are. Why? Because he has tools that give him greater reach. His heart is desperately wicked, just like these people. He wants the same things. He uses the same tactics. How many times does he have to boast about being a king or a dictator? Oh, only for a little while, right? And so we need to understand where this is coming from, what its purpose is. Yes, these other things in terms of pollution, in terms of noise pollution, in terms of electric bills, in terms of the financial cost of it to us, the taxes, the electricity costs, those are all real problems. And many people are only going to be motivated by that. But we need to take this from the perspective of what the government's intention is on this. Because if we don't stop the government's intention, we will lose. And that was the important thing I wanted you to hear from Matt, along with the Christian perspective, folks. We're not going to win this. We just had, I'm not going to have time to get to it today. Tulsi Gabbard, been driven by her Hindu guru. Let me tell you, this country is not founded on Hindu principles. It's not founded on Jewish principles or Muslim principles. It's founded on Christian principles. It's a very different set of principles. And we will not have an America without those Christian principles. It is only the Christians who understand that man is desperately wicked. And it is only the Christians who want to take measures to try to keep that in check. And that has to be the fighting stance that we take against these data centers and against artificial intelligence and the people like Marsha Blackburn who want to pull it all together. So when you go back to John Lennox here, I think that's his name, Lennox, but the guy from Oxford, he is an excellent apologist when it comes to debating atheists. But he doesn't have the discernment that Matt does when it comes to human nature. Listen to what he says about technology. He says it's like a sharp knife. You can use it for surgery or you can use it for murder. Well, that's right? It is a tool. The problem is that government is developing these tools for one purpose and one purpose only. He goes on to say, you can see AI developing new vaccines. Let's stop right there. That's the Stargate thing. And yes, go ahead, Lance.
Well, I was just going to say, calling it a knife, it's sort of like, if they're making a giant broadsword and they tell you, oh, this is for cutting bread. I mean, yes, theoretically you could use it for cutting bread, but clearly there is a use case that this is designed for that isn't so benign.
That's right. Yeah, it is not, it's obviously not benign, and neither is AI developing new vaccines. Because it also brings to us facial recognition. He said, now that's wonderful at picking out a terrorist out of a football crowd. But it's not so good if you are suppressing an ethnic minority in China. Now, I just got to say, when you're talking about picking a terrorist out of a football crowd, is that really what they're going to do? Or are they going to pick out people that they don't like for some reason? Because we've already seen them picking us out. They have picked me out of social media. They picked me out of YouTube. They picked me out of PayPal, and on and on. And I'm not the only one. Many people have been selected by that. As a matter of fact, there are a lot of people who are saying that X is doing that to a lot of people, and I think they're doing it to me as well. But I know I'm shadow banned, but now I think they have basically just kicked me off. I can't log in again, and we still have one computer that is still connected. Once it is kicked off, that account is going to be closed. And I have my phone. Those are the only two places where I can get into X right now.
And they haven't responded to any of our messages.
I have Premium Plus, and we've gone 2 weeks trying to get a reply from them. Multiple requests from them. They will not respond. Of course, that's the first thing they say about Premium Plus, that they respond right away. And where it is stopping is very suspicious as well. It asks for my login credentials. And if I give it the wrong login credentials, it spits it out and asks me to give them again. When I give it the right login credentials, it goes to the next step, which is to say, well, where do you want your step 2 verification sent? Do you want it sent in an email or in a phone call, a text? And it is at that point, after it has established who I am, that it stops and it won't go further. And they will not reply to me. So again, this is not, who is a terrorist? One man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter, right? And of course, Trump's terrorists, it's very much like what he's talking about with this stupid reflecting pond nonsense. And as several people pointed out, we have Brian and Deb McCartney, as well as Bride Mac said, it is the deflecting pool. Absolutely. That's a great way to point out. It is the deflecting pool. It deflects people away from Epstein, from the Iran war, and all the rest of this stuff. And of course, he's arrested a lot more people than he ever did or would in connection with the Epstein files, just because of his stupid pool. Radis Bro, thank you for the tip. He said, next they will fill the reflecting pool with Brondo. the thirst mutilator that everyone knows algae doesn't like. Yeah, thank you for putting that up there, Lance. I didn't know. He says Brondo was the product from Idiocracy. It's what plants crave. Yeah, that's right. I didn't catch the reference there, so thank you, Lance, and thank you, Radis Bro. That's funny. Epstein Island. Nobody saw anyone do anything to that pool. That's right. You know that if any of that had been true, you know they've got the area under surveillance. Come on. You know, these monuments, they don't have them under surveillance. If somebody had done something with that, they would produce the video footage and they would go after that person. He's just making this stuff all up as usual. Obamism, I guess. Imagine looking out your window and seeing data centers and you have no water or electricity. Yeah, that's right. Because it's all about their political power. It's not about us even having water. Birdhouse Blues. And if you live next door to a data center, suddenly your property value drops. So then they can buy you out and expand. Yeah, right now in Nashville, they've got a fight against a data center that's going to be right next to a zoo. Have a lot more concern for the zoo animals than they do for you and I. That's the reality. People can fight this for a number of reasons. And look, I hope that they stop it at the Nashville Zoo. I don't want to see the animals stressed out. But let's understand, this is about turning us into guinea pigs and lab rats and human slaves. That's what the data centers are about. You got to oppose it on that principle, because that is the foundation of all this stuff. Everything else is just shooting at the periphery. Soylent Goy says, once everyone realizes that they're being monitored 24/7, their behavior will change dramatically. We see it already with phone cameras. Well, and of course they boasted about that. You had, I think it was Eric Schmidt that did that, or was it somebody else? Was it maybe Larry Ellison who said, well, you know, people will just be better behaved if they're surveilled all the time. Yeah, that's the Soviet Union and the Chinese communist approach to all of that. NMAX says the scamdemic showed you a bird's eye view of what they plan to do to you every day of your life. Total control, total domination, and tyranny. And of course, a big part of that was to punish people who spoke back against this. Look at what they did to doctors and nurses, not just because they were refusing to get vaccinated, but anybody who would come up with an alternative to what their central plan was. Their central plan was, just as they had practiced since Dark Winter, practiced since 2 months before 9/11, we're going to have a pandemic, and we're going to lock everybody and everything down until we have an emergency vaccine that we give people. That's going to be the basis of you getting your life back. And that is exactly the plan that they ran. There's never any question in my mind that this whole thing was fake. Now I don't even believe virology because they told so many lies about virology. But an excellent book, which I'll recommend again, by doctors Sam Bailey, and I can't ever remember her husband's first name. I interviewed the two of them, but I remember her name because it's unusual for a woman to be called Sam. I guess her name is Samantha, but the book is The Last Pandemic. And if you read their research, and it made me think about it when I saw all of the criticism that Pete Hegseth, finally I got something I agree with Pete Hegseth on. That is, he stopped all of these vaccine mandates for the military. So you got, I think it was the New York Times, one of these large newspapers, came after Pete Hegseth and said, look at this. They got an epidemic of flu that is happening. Well, you might want to go back and take a look at the 60 Minutes report that Mike Wallace did, where he exposed the lie about swine flu. What did they do with swine flu? Well, they started it with a narrative about the military, and he interviewed someone who was paralyzed for life with Guillain-Barré syndrome. And she said, I looked at this and I thought, well, if these healthy young men in the military can get this, I better get my vaccine to stop me from getting it. It's just a lie. And of course, the New York Times is pushing that yet again. Well, we appreciate your tuning in to the show. And if you find the show valuable, we'd appreciate your support. We're getting close to the end of the month. The gas gauge has pretty much been frozen for last week or two. If you'd like to find out how you can support the show and where you can get the show, go to davidknight.news. Thank you very much. The Common Man. They created Common Core to dumb down our children. They created Common Pass to track and control us. Their Commons Project to make sure the commoners own nothing. And the communist future. They see the common man as simple, unsophisticated, ordinary. But each of us has worth and dignity, created in the image of God. That is what we have in common. That is what they want to take away. Their most powerful weapons are isolation, deception, intimidation. They desire to know everything about us while they hide everything from us. It's time to turn that around and expose what they want to hide. Please share the information and links you'll find at thedavidknightshow.com. Thank you for listening. Thank you for sharing. If you can't support us financially, please keep us in your prayers. thedavidknightshow.com.